Welcome in to another episode of my Dynasty Fantasy Football YouTube. Today I'm looking at some Dynasty stashes. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's go. So the first player today, Parker Washington. So I think Washington's probably the most talked about of these players, but I thought he was a good choice to talk about first. In 2024, 8 games, 6 catches, 67 yards, and 9 targets so far. So obviously he hasn't been a full-time player. Until now, the Jaguars had stuck with their starting 3 wide receiver set of Gabe Davis, Brian Thomas, and Christian Kirk, who had played all 8 games. Washington barely played at all. He did have 3 catches, 46 yards, 4 targets, and a 74% snap share last week. He replaced an injured Kirk. Of course, now Kirk is out for the year. Now, why do I have Parker Washington as the dynasty stash? Well, I think there's potential for a long-term role and a short-term ability to flash. He was a slot wide receiver prospect all along. He played in the slot 87.5% of the time at Penn State. So it made him a very odd fit on the Jaguars, who had an established slot wide receiver in Christian Kirk. But now Washington has a chance to play. Kirk has a $27.3 million cap hit for 2025 with only $13.5 million in dead cap. He has not been involved very much this year. Now he has a season-ending injury. I fully expect Kirk to be a cap casualty. He's not worth that salary, especially with Brian Thomas Jr., Evan Ingram, and Gabe Davis under his cheap contract already there. Whether Washington earns the long-term slot role or not, Kirk doesn't seem to be part of their plans. So Washington has an opportunity to earn that role. Now, both Brian Thomas and Gabe Davis are currently injured. Thomas has a chest injury, ribs/chest, and Davis has a shoulder injury. Both may play this week, but they seem to be somewhat limited. They might not be at 100%. So Washington has a chance to flash a bit right now and gain value, which is all we're looking for in a dynasty stash. Next one, Miles Sanders. So Sanders seems a little bit out of place on this tanking Panthers team, but he's had a role all season in place of the injured Jonathan Brooks. In 8 games, 34 carries, 139 yards and a touchdown, 4.1 yards a carry, and 19 catches for 103 yards. He's actually been more involved in the passing game this year than he was last year. More efficient as a runner this year than he was last year. He hasn't been bad. He just hasn't been as good as Chuba Hubbard, which I think everyone can agree on. Now, why do I have Miles Sanders as a dynasty stash? Well, there could be a move at the trade deadline. The Panthers seem to be extremely patient with Brooks, as he's slated to miss this week, even though he practiced all 3 days in full. But Brooks must be activated next week, or he misses the entire season. It makes sense that the Panthers might trade Sanders to a contender who needs running back. Cowboys are brought up, but a running back could get injured this week, could provide an opportunity somewhere for Sanders. Either way, I think Sanders is going to be gone. Or if Brooks is just out for the year, Sanders will remain Hubbard's handcuff. These are the types of players that, yeah, it seems like, oh, Miles Sanders is never going to get an opportunity, whatever. But you never know. Running backs gain value really, really quickly. And Sanders is someone who's had fantasy value before. So I would label him as a dynasty stash. Next up, Jordan Whittington. So I think people have mostly forgotten about Whittington. He had a couple of big games, but then he suffered a shoulder injury and went back under the radar. So far, 18 catches, 201 yards on 23 targets, but almost all of that production came in 2 games. He barely played for the first 3 weeks. Then in week 4, 6 catches for 62 yards. And week 5, 7 catches for 89 yards. He played 97 and 92% snap shares in those games. But then he kind of disappeared. Week 6 bye. Then there was the weird week 7 game where he was on the injury report. Weird things happened. And now he missed week 8. And now he's forgotten about with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua back. Although we're going to see about that. Now, why do I have Whittington as a dynasty stash? Well, he's flash talent already. There's all the Puka Nacua injuries, Kupp trade rumors, and then the other wide receiver options have been kind of ineffective. So Whittington already had games where he played well, which is unusual for a 6-star rookie. Most of the time, they don't do anything as rookies. Nacua has now injured the same knee 3 separate times, including this latest practice injury. It's unclear if Nacua will miss time, but if he's limited, that could open up more of a role for Whittington over time. Kupp is surrounded by trade rumors. I lean that Kupp is not dealt at the trade deadline unless the Rams are absolutely blown out of the water this week, but he could be an offseason trade candidate. The Rams would save over $12 million by dealing him in the offseason. It could be a move that they want to do. And none of the Rams' other receiving options have provided consistent production. Tutu Atwell actually leads the Rams in targets right now. You probably wouldn't believe that. But he rotates between being a starter and a bit part player who's totally irrelevant to the offense. Plus, he's a free agent after this year. Demarcus Robinson has fewer receptions than Whittington, despite playing a high snap count in every single game. So Whittington, who's barely played, has more catches than Demarcus Robinson. Tyler Johnson is just a guy. Hasn't impressed me. And Colby Parkinson was involved earlier, but he's been phased out, playing fewer snaps, especially as a receiver. So I'm not interested in him. Therefore, the door is open for Whittington to claim a bigger role in this offense over time. At the end of the day, young receivers who have flashed some talent are players we want to stash in Dynasty, and Whittington fits that bill perfectly. I'm going to do something different than the usual Patreon promo, because I think at this point, you know what the Patreon offers. Look, I get it. There's a lot of fantasy football content out there for free. But if all content is free, then all content is going to be done by people doing this for a hobby or by people who, are just kind of doing it for fun or whatever. Like, I get it. I get that this is a very, very tough sell, especially lately. But I don't know what else to do. Like, in terms of selling the Patreon, advertising it, I can't advertise it more than I do. I can't, I think everyone's aware of it, but I don't know how I can convince more people to sign up. And look, if I'm being honest, like the YouTube channel has been doing well, but not well enough to survive on its own. And maybe it never will. And that's okay. I do enjoy doing the YouTube, but it's not very profitable or really profitable at all. And, I don't want to have to just put everything behind the paywall, but I'll do it if that's what becomes necessary. And it sucks. Like, I get it. This all sucks. I understand that only doing advice for people who can afford to pay for it sucks. But if you were me and people used to leave the Patreon because they could get the same answers from me for free, what would you do? What would you do if you were in my shoes? It's not personal. It's just a business decision. So I'm running out of things to say in these promos. But I will say that I really appreciate everyone who signs up. Like, I am active in there every single day. If you notice, we don't do breaking news YouTube videos anymore. We don't do any YouTube videos that are out of the ordinary. Why? Because I only do the YouTube videos on here that I know can be successful. And that's very, very few types of videos. For everything else, I have to do it behind the Patreon paywall because it has to be supported by something. If it's not going to get a lot of views, it has to be supported by money. I hate saying that, even that word out loud, but money. It has to be supported by that. But it sucks. It sucks that just the way things are. It sucks. And I don't see any way to, I don't really see any other way. So yeah, that's what I'm asking. I would love it if you signed up, because one day this channel won't be here. And that'll be all, the Patreon will be all that's left. So yeah, that's it. We'll move on to the next player now. So, next player, Kayshon Boutte. So, I think there's a sense that the Patriots are just a mess, but there could be some stash value on this team. Of the deeper options, I think Boutte is the most exciting. In 6 games, 11 catches, 185 yards, touchdown, 16 targets. But his role has steadily been ramping up. He's become one of the starting outside wide receivers over the last 3 weeks, where he has 7 catches, 138 yards, a touchdown, 11 targets. Of course, those aren't great numbers, but on this offense, honestly, that's not bad. He's played 82 or 83% of the snaps in all 3 games, so he's been very consistent in terms of his playing time. Now, why do I have Boutte as a dynasty stash? Well, We know that Kendrick Bourne and KJ Osborne are trade candidates. Boutte was once a top prospect. Now, the Patriots are obviously not a winning team. Bourne and Osborne are not part of their future. I think they have their slot wide receiver in Demario Douglas, but they need to see if Boutte, Jalen Polk, maybe even Javon Baker can be part of their outside wide receiver conversation moving forward. But unlike those other players, Boutte was a top college prospect at one point. In 2020, as an 18-year-old freshman, he averaged 73.5 yards a game. And then in 6 games played in 2021, 84.7 receiving yards a game. He was supposed to be the next great LSU wide receiver. Somehow, even though it feels like he's been around forever, he's just 22 years old. He's got plenty of time still to break out. Maybe now he's got his chance to do so. So Boutte should be rostered in all Dynasty leagues if he isn't already. Last player, and this is probably the most low-key of these players, Mason Tipton. I still think he could have a bit of stash value. He hasn't done much so far. In 8 games, 14 catches, 99 yards on 22 targets. A lot of targets, actually. But for UDFA, that's actually not bad. Over the past 2 weeks, 8 catches, 59 yards on 11 targets. He's filled in for injuries to Rashid Shaheed, Bud Means, and Chris Olave at times. And now Shaheed's out for the year. Means has a high ankle sprain. He could miss some time. Tipton's played 83 and 77% snap shares in the past 2 games. Now, why do I have Mason Tipton as the dynasty stash? Well, he has opportunity, and Derek Carr is returning. The Saints have no choice but to play Tipton right now. He's their clear wide receiver 2 behind Chris Olave. Derek Carr is going to return this week, providing a massive quarterback upgrade, as Spencer Rattler's been horrible in all 3 starts, getting benched in 2 of them, and he held down the value of all Saints wide receivers. So far this year, Carr's completed 70.31% of his passes and averaged 7.7 yards per attempt. So he's actually been playing well. Most of his touchdowns occurred in the first 2 weeks, but he hadn't been awful even beyond that. Either way, he is leagues better than Spencer Rattler. So I'm hoping that Carr coming back opens the door for Chris Olave to be an elite wide receiver, and then maybe there'll be other players. Mason Tipton would be high on my list of other players on the team to look at for stash value. Now, no news today. We have one Patreon question. It's kind of actually an interesting one, so we'll just jump into it. At what point in the season should you reevaluate your dynasty team? If you find yourself not contending or contending this year, to send off older players for younger or picks. Well, we're already past that point. You should know after 8 weeks if you're a contender by now. I mean, I'd have usually started sending off those older players already. Why is that? Well, if you wait too long, the number of contenders declines. More and more teams realize, oh, I'm not going to win this year. Oh, I'm not going to win this year. So your available market for those players decreases. Additionally, the worst thing to do is to be stuck in the middle. You get stuck in the middle in Dynasty forever, and you just always have an okay team. You never get better. You never get worse. You just kind of run it back. You don't want to be there. Now, in terms of specific advice, and this just kind of goes in with what I was saying earlier during the Patreon promo, the YouTube channel, we're going to stick to evaluating players. We're going to talk about players and statistics and stuff like that, because that's what does well. That's what does well on the YouTube channel. People are interested in hearing about sleepers, stashes, takeaways from the NFL. What doesn't do well, and we will not see in YouTube content moving forward, is stuff like talking about dynasty trades, in specific, like evaluating your trades, all of that. Those will be Patreon exclusives. They don't do well on the YouTube algorithm. For me, maybe they do well for other people, but on my YouTube channel, they don't do well. So I talk about and evaluate dynasty trades. It's one of the, other than start sit in season, I think it's the main thing we talk about in my Patreon Discord. Dynasty trade evaluation, dynasty trade strategy. So if you want patreon.com/fantasy advice, you can click on the top right corner to join. That's where I mostly cover this. And I also do roster reviews of Patreon dynasty teams where I talk you through this kind of stuff. But yeah, most of that stuff is going to go on beyond the behind paywall. Now, if you like the video, make sure to drop a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. As always, the best way to support the channel is to subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notifications bell so you can be notified about all my exciting content as it drops. Of course, if you want my best fantasy football advice, it's available on the Patreon. Dynasty starts at redraft more. And as I think I said for probably about 3 minutes too long earlier, every sign up helps support my independent content. Once again, thanks for watching. Thanks for, sticking with me throughout this long season. And I will see you all later.